Mark, before we let you go, though, we'd like to hear some thoughts and some comments you made earlier this week about domestic violence. For our viewers who haven't heard them, here's what Mark had to say.
Blokes who've lost self-esteem, they've lost their job, they're welfare dependent, they've got other troubles, drugs, alcohol in their life. It's that loss of self-esteem where I think they use the domestic violence as a coping mechanism to get over all the other crap that they've got in their lives.
Obviously, this has caused some outrage, Mark. Do you stand by those comments, and do we really need to be making excuses for perpetrators of domestic violence?
Well, Eddie, the critics haven't done their research, you see. I was paraphrasing there a very important report in New South Wales from the Coroner's Court, where they look at the domestic violence deaths and produce some conclusions about them. And they talk about a coping mechanism where men living in poverty, underclass circumstances, poor self-esteem, use domestic violence as a macabre, tragic type of coping mechanism. So the critics in this area run on emotion and ideology instead of facts and actually going to read the report. I urge people to read that report.
Well, the facts
and if you
are
haven't
that...
read it, you're not doing justice to the issue.
Mark, the facts are that domestic violence doesn't just affect people in low socioeconomic circumstances. It stretches right across all levels of society, doesn't it?
Well, it's concentrated there. Eddie, the basic fact is that for every domestic incident in a middle-class family in Australia, there are 10 in a public housing estate, 25 in Indigenous communities. That's borne out by crime statistics around the country. So you can't really deal with this serious issue in a proper way unless you're providing accurate analysis. And to say there's an epidemic, that's wrong. To say it's evenly spread across the community, that's wrong. To say that it's a product of patriarchy where somehow men have been genetically engineered to dominate women, that's ridiculous.
Do you stand by your statement that women are safer than they've ever been before, given that there are close to 80 deaths from domestic violence across Australia last year?
Yeah, well, Eddie, I urge you to read the ABS Personal Safety Survey that shows that since 1996... You have read it? Well,
yeah.
You'll notice that since 1996, the rate of domestic assault and incidents has come down according to that report. So you can only go by the official statistics rather than left-wing feminist hysteria.
So you do believe that, in fact, Rosie Batty, from you, quote, causes more harm than good?
Well, I don't think it's helpful to demonise men in these circumstances. I don't think it's helpful to go around talking about an epidemic when actually in Australia the domestic assault rate against women in a 12-month period is 1%. Now, I wish it was 0%, of course. We all want it to be 0%. But I know enough about politics to realise that if you want to analyse and get solutions to a problem, you have to be accurate. And saying there's an epidemic, which sort of suggests the rate is 50 or 60%, when in fact it's 1%, that does a disservice to the women in need because you're dealing in fantasy rather than fact.
Mark, speaking as a fellow bloke, we've just got to be so careful about these messages and making excuses for this. I just...
Well, no, I'm not. No one's making excuses here, Mike. What you've got to be careful about is analysing the facts, rather than propaganda that people put out there that's not supported by official government reports, official government surveys, and there's nothing I've said that's not factual. Now, we've had a few items here where you've tried to say, oh, well, maybe that's not the case. I've got references, I've got reports, I've got official surveys that back up the facts and figures that I'm putting out there. Now, it mightn't be the information that people want to hear, but I'd rather have a debate where you can deal in reality rather than left-wing feminist fantasy.
All right, Mark Latham, thank you for your time.